Sebastian. Clickers here.
Now that is a challenge after trying to get to a summer body. And Linda asked me to divulge a little bit how the national. I hope the mic is working now properly. I try to be as entertaining as our Norwegian guests. But unfortunately, I'm from the Netherlands, so usually that's not really humorful. But I'll try and do my best. Linda asked me to introduce you a little bit on the supercluster agri-food in the Netherlands. And then I asked, I work at the university. We're not the cluster manager. Yes, but the Netherlands is doing really great in agri and food, and it's a prime example to many in the world. So let me try and walk you through a bit on the developments in the past 25 years that brought us to this position. But it also is needed then to explain a little bit on where Wageningen University and Research is situated in that, for which I work as corporate director on value creation. And that means that I may lead the third mission of our university. Next to education and research, that's really getting research results, educational results into societal practice. And what other way to do that is to do that together with industry, together with farmers, together with many different stakeholders. So we've been active in the cluster modus of operandi in a way, but we never mentioned or called it as such. But first, maybe a little look into a comparison, because I'm going to speak to you both from a hyper-local perspective as well as from a national perspective. Even though we're situated in a region which is more or less akin to Northern Ireland with 2 million inhabitants, that is Gelderland, which is a province of the Netherlands. But most of the stuff that we see in the agri and food business in the Netherlands is done nationwide. And then one of the striking figures is that the Netherlands might outperform Northern Ireland a bit in terms of export. So 125 billion euros last year was the export value of agri and food business from the Netherlands. 13% of all exports were agri and food. But I look upon that not from a regional or local perspective, but the Netherlands is already very small. If you plot other international clusters or international innovation ecosystems on the Netherlands, you see that it is really, really small. And this is only taken 12 years ago, so nowadays we have 18 million inhabitants, not 16 anymore, but still, same holds. And do take that into account if you look to Northern Ireland as well. And one of the things that struck me when I started working at Wageningen University and Research was in 2017 and 2018, others told us that we are a supercluster. So we had a specific multi-page article in the National Geographic, and just later on in the Financial Times, there was a full feature on the upcoming startups as well as venture capital in the scene. Now, where did that come from? Then it might be handy to have a better understanding of what is Wageningen University and Research, because it are two organizations. It's not just a university doing fundamental research and education, but it's also an applied research institute. Both are relatively large, but together they're really big. So 7,000 colleagues. I might call them colleagues because each and every one of them is really fostering and working on agri, in agricultural production, but also in food processing, as well as in circular and bio-based technologies, in environmental sciences, as well as in the social sciences, in everything to do on agri and food. And we're all over the Netherlands, but we're managed as one organization. So we have one board, and each science group, more or less like a faculty with a university, is managed as one group, but governed by two distinct sets of law. So that makes it a little bit of hassle now and again. And our department, or the team that I may lead, works for both. So both for the university as well as for the RTO. And what we've been doing, and that comes back to, we're located all over the Netherlands. We have, we call them innovation hubs or farms close to the customers. These were original farms, glass houses, as well as specific like dairy farming. All up in the north, we have experimental farms where we can use the latest stage of technology or the latest innovations and use that in real life setting. So we can do TRL 0 at the university up until 9, together with industry in these farms. That means that we can and we should and we always have been working with industry and with farmers. The current strategic plan is actually called Finding Answers Together, because we know that all the challenges, the transitions that we face in agri and food are so big and so complex that we need to find and get your brains there as well. So what I would like to discuss a little bit are the dilemmas that we have had in the past 20 years in seeing into innovation and into the sort of the cluster arrangement that we've been working on, but also pick your brain. So I hope for some questions, but also maybe some ideas, because we've been doing this for some time, but it's been a bumpy ride, and usually in the Netherlands we tend to look with project periods of time of 4 and 5 years. So we never took off with the end in mind of working for a cluster or a cluster approach with a 20 years mindset. I would advise you to do so. Now, what is then maybe part of the sort of appeal that is Wageningen campus nowadays? It is a campus where 24,000 people are focused on agri and food tech, studying, researching, but also innovating and being very entrepreneurial. Over 230 companies are also residing on our campus. I'll give you a very quick, and I might cut it off, video on what the campus actually is to give you a feel on how that actually works, because there are parts and bits and pieces of the dilemmas mentioned in that.
This is Wageningen campus. This is where we meet, learn and work. This is where thousands of people from all over the world come together. Committed to creating innovative solutions, together we find answers to global challenges. How to create healthy and sustainable food systems. What is needed to advance a circular and bio-based economy, and how will we adapt to climate change? We're here to explore, to inspire, and to be inspired. Sharing one campus helps us easily interact and exchange our expertise and knowledge. A vibrant community where we innovate and share research facilities. A place where new technologies and innovative processes can be improved, validated, and scaled up. At Wageningen campus, we're all different. What brings us together is our ambition, our joint mission. We all have a curious mind and a green heart. Sustainability is at our core, reflected in our green campus. When it comes to innovation, we're pioneers. We're entrepreneurs and game changers. We're scientists and engineers. Every day, we see opportunities to build sustainable and healthy food systems. We discover new technologies to develop a circular and bio-based economy. We create solutions for nature conservation and prevention of biodiversity loss. We care for our nature and society. Together, we know more and do better. This is our contribution to the world. This is Wageningen campus. Join us.
So the dilemma I wanted to pose is hyperlocality. The campus is doing great. We've attracted many companies over the past 10 years. But one of the things that kicked it off was actually the loss of a big company. When Danone took over Nutricia in 2010, 2011, the research laboratories of that company were moved, potentially to France, but in the end it moved just within the Netherlands, 40 kilometers away. So for many of the local and the university administration, that was all a sort of a call to action. And that's why we started having more companies on campus. But with this narrative that you just heard, we need to change the world, produce within planetary boundaries, and then you're welcome. So we also try to have companies or research organizations that do not share this vision set up elsewhere. So that's the hyper-local dilemma, but yet again, there is a multinational and a global challenge that we like to address with the research and the entrepreneurs that we're working with. So what is then that to you as a cluster, hyper-local or global? Second thing is time. This campus actually took us 25 years to build. And it all started with almost the demise of the university. So in 1998, Wageningen University was on the brink of being dissolved because we had too few students. And at that time, national administration were considering breaking up the university and putting parts at other universities. Then in the end, it was decided to combine it with Wageningen Research. At that time, a department at the Ministry of Agriculture. And actually that combination proved to be really successful because then you have not only fundamental research but also applied. And you can really prolong it throughout the value chain, which is why we're now in conversation within the UK on the Agri-Tech Centre development, which is taking place all over the UK and also here in Northern Ireland. And what it did with us is we tried to shed all the university research groups that were all over the city and put it all into one campus. And after that took already 20 years to get that done. And in the meantime, we've set also up a cluster organization. Food Valley is actually an innovation cluster. This year we're going to celebrate the 20th anniversary. And it moved away from a classical innovation connector to nowadays, with over 300 members, more of a transition agent. So the cluster itself is trying to push boundaries on getting those innovations really upscaled and really beyond the pilot. We set up an accelerator program, and I'll touch upon that slightly later. And in 2012, the national government decided to change the entire applied and innovation policies towards a more industry-led, mission-oriented innovation policy. And one of them is the top sector, agri and food, for which we do quite a lot. If we then look into the modeling that we've been doing today, Wageningen Research, the Applied Research Institute, was already working in a quadruple helix for a very long time. Since the mid-50s, we used to have a joint applied research agenda with clusters within the agri fields. Unfortunately, that was abolished in 2010 by the national government, and now we have this new top sector policy which is more catering towards larger and incumbent industries instead of focusing on supporting different farmer communities, which is unfortunate. But in the same time, we also saw a transition towards weaving in entrepreneurship and capital into this ecosystem. And that's where we've also started up, of course, like many universities, an incubator on the left-hand side. After a company has been started, then the accelerator Start Life can come in. And 10 years ago, we started with a large event, FNA Next, which is held each year in May, where we bring together over 800 participants from all over the world, bringing together investors, entrepreneurs, and large multinational companies. And the last thing that we did in the past 5 years, we've started to collaborate nationwide as a university, together with the other technical universities, to have a joint national spin-off program, where we have the same set of rules, the same way of working in tech transfer, in order to foster the best scalable companies. So not every bright idea and bright team might enroll in this program, but only those that are really going to scale and really going to scale fast. So there's a fast learning curve, and it works really well. Not only with other universities, but also with venture capital funds, who then back the first seed funding for those companies. So what we then learned by doing was StartLife originally started as an incubator. But in 2010, there were not enough companies coming out of Wageningen University itself, because most of our researchers were not entrepreneurial. Pretty commercial, but not entrepreneurial. So already after a couple of years, we moved the focus of this incubator to an accelerator, and then later on we added an incubator again when the time was better ripe. And nowadays, StartLife focuses on agri and food tech startups from all over Europe. So of the 40 companies we coach annually, many of them also come from Ireland, or from Israel, or from Germany, wherever. So they do come in, do settle down, and they do grow. And that can only be done if you have your partners. So this is a partnership and a sponsorship fee model where it's not 1,700 or 2,500 per year that these companies actually pay, but it is between 25,000 and 50,000 a year. And that really bolsters the capacity of this Europe-wide accelerator. And of course, we all bring that then together once a year in F&A Next, which is done jointly. So not by Wageningen University alone, but also by venture capital, by banking, as well as by the national cluster, Food Valley. And you're kindly invited. One of the other challenges is then what are other roles you would need to be doing in your cluster? And I would like to pose two other ideas to you, particularly the tables on agri and food. Opening up and sharing research facilities is really something that actually helps speeding up innovation. Because SMEs in particular might want to invest but do not have the means. If they have a pay-per-use model to make use of the best machinery, it's always better economically. But more importantly, all of these machines, they actually spark conversation. Why it is that we need an MRI scanner, for example. It's situated, of course, in a hospital, because during daytimes it's used for regular hospital practice, but during evening times research is done on that. But why do you want to have these measurements? What is then the next step of innovation you're going to take? So all these sharing facilities also sparks new stories. And another point of discussion, particularly for the agri and food tables, in how far should you also weave into your consideration dialogues? Because particularly in the agri and food, trying to produce within planetary boundaries is very tough, but we need to go there. Over 25 to 30% of GHG emissions come from agri and food. Over 25% of all food is wasted, particularly in the Western world, that is on these tables, so at the plate side, not at the farm side, which is more of the case in less affluent countries. But changing it is also challenging the status quo. And we've had these protests at our doorstep, and we also foster dialogues in order to understand one another better, because these changes are not easy. The challenges are complex. So should that be part of your cluster? Maybe. So what we've seen in the past couple of years, we've indeed been moving in these 25 years to the Pentagon model, but not as one cluster and one management, but we sort of had all kinds of organizations taking parts and pieces of that initiative. That can also work. And it might well work within the Netherlands because, particularly in the agri side, we have a cooperative DNA. Many of the large companies, we have over 20 multinationals on our Wageningen campus. We have over 10 very large multinational companies in the Netherlands with their headquarters or R&D centers. Many of them are cooperatives. Friesland Campina, Rabobank, Goosen, and many of the leading Dutch companies are actually owned by farmers or owned by many individuals. So there's already a form of collaborative and cooperative way of working, and maybe that is part of the success, I don't know, of the Dutch agri-food model. But it's all in the eye of the beholder. Is this really successful? We hope we're doing good. Many people come and try to be part of it. You're kindly invited either with any conference or to come over to the to the campus or any of the other innovation hubs. But then what is the value that you add with your cluster that you're building on the table? And that is not something which can be calculated, as Simon Sinek once said, but it's a perception. So you really need to weave that in with the stakeholders to really get their feeling on how they perceive the value that you're delivering. And we've heard great examples earlier today, particularly business-driven clusters, and a long support of government is really keen and needed to get that and in mind when you start, but have that value at the forefront of our mind. That is what I wanted to bring, and hopefully you have some questions or maybe ideas how we can improve.
Thank you.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Yeah?
In Dutch.
In Dutch, yeah. So, Dutch questions? Niemand? Helemaal niemand? Eenmaal? Andermaal? No questions. No questions? Okay. Okay.
Sorry. Is it true that you're considering to relocate to Belfast to take a job as a cluster manager here?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Well, if the offer is good.
Good. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
One question. Yes, sir. Yeah.
I mean, we talked a lot today.
Yeah.
We talked a lot today around really the reinventing yourself as clusters, the importance of reinvention. We talked about the S-curve, and you showed really what you've been doing in the last 20, 25 years. Where do you see really the evolutions or revolutions in Wageningen in the next 10 years?
2 or 3 things. First of all, this was a very, of course, a slick presentation, and it looks like everything went really well over 25 years. But as said, we start with 4 or 5 year project time, so it's maneuvering down the road and reinventing also. I think the next step, particularly for Wageningen campus, and we're writing the new strategy at the moment, has a 15-year perspective. And the first thing we need to do is to understand the campus organization is led by and paid for by Wageningen University. But we're getting to a point that there's just as many jobs non-university as there are to the university. So we need to get the scale and the balance back in. And that's quite difficult. So the challenge is, how do we get companies also pay for campus development? Because they're currently not doing that. And secondly, we need to really start better storytelling on startup companies. We have had great examples, but many of them stall at, say, 10 to 15 persons. But really the big, well, I don't like unicorns because that's only about company value, but in how far are those startup companies really making societal impact, environmental impact? That's the stories I want to be able to tell in a couple of years' time. So that's where we also need help with great minds and great ideas, also from clusters here in Northern Ireland, to see those and foster those into great global companies.
All right.
Good.
Thank you.